I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Thiago, thanks for joining me today. We got a lot to talk about, but the first thing that I really want to talk about before we talk about your company is the Brazilian tech mafia. What is the Brazilian tech mafia? I know we brainstormed a while ago. We were thinking about some of your story ideas, and you mentioned this, and it's like, I got to talk to Thiago about this. So what is going on there? And obviously, we'll get into the Toric story in just a second.
Hi, it's nice to be here. So yeah, I think when we talked, it was the beginning of discovering what this mafia is going to look like. In fact, because I have discovered that there's actually lots of different Brazilian entrepreneurs in the Bay Area, and we're kind of each other giving access to to people, financing. Sometimes we actually have in my investors, there's at least a couple of Brazilian companies that are in growth stage with us, and we just discovered after we had actually been financed, and I think it all started, to be honest, with the fintech in Brazil. I think there's a lot of fintech in Brazil because of the history of financial institutions in Brazil. Brazil had hyperinflation in the 90s, so companies had to build a lot of financial automation tools to cope up with hyperinflation and to control how they made money, especially banks. So we had a ledger in Brazil back in the 90s, which is a long time ago, an official ledger, and you had APIs for banking systems and financial institutions for a very long time. So because of that, there was a lot of fintech in Brazil. I think all accounting in Brazil has been digital for a long time. You can pay people with a barcode in Brazil for like 20 years or plus, and I think now we're getting there here in the US. And then companies like, I think Nubank just IPO'd here in the US in NASDAQ, and I think that inspires a new generation of entrepreneurs. I think Brex as well, two Brazilian founders that did the same thing in Brazil. They started a fintech in Brazil that then got acquired, and then they came here and they're building another fintech company. So that's the connection there.
That's a lot, because if I look at, anyone can look at your LinkedIn, right? Anyone can look at your background, and it's Rio, and it's Portland, Oregon, and it's Montreal, and it's California. You've had a lot of moves. You've done a lot of things. So how did you even get to the Bay Area? Was it through a Brazilian connection? Was it through work? It's not like you just said, okay, I'm from Brazil, I moved to the Bay Area, I'm going to do a tech startup, boom. It's not that simple. You've got quite the journey along the way here.
Yeah, it was a Brazilian who gave me the opportunity to come to the US.
Of course it was.
So Nando Costa actually has the same last name as me, but I worked for him from Brazil. He was a designer working in the US. Now he's the director of brand at Microsoft. And Nando gave me the opportunity to come to Portland, Oregon, and I came in 2007 the first time. And it seems like it's been a long time now.
Then to talk about Toric. So Toric, from what I can understand, is it's for architects, engineers, construction. It's no code, low code. It's software apps for them to do their work. And it's a world, my guess is, that could use a lot of technology upgrades, right? There's probably still a lot of people with their carbon copy on the clipboard, right? It's a lot of pen and paper. It's a lot of looking at photographs and maybe sending emails around and blueprints. There's a lot of paper involved, but you're trying to digitize. But how do we digitize without all this code, without needing to hire a bunch of tech workers in a world where it's like, no, we need people on site. We need people to do stuff. We don't want to spend a lot on overhead here. So what's your background in engineering and construction? How did you even get to this? So I want to hear a little bit more about what's going on with Toric here.
Yeah, I think the story, my first company a long time ago was a physics simulation engine. Then my second company was a mechanical engineering product that was built on the cloud, and that company got acquired into Autodesk. And at Autodesk, I ran data for the company for the past, all the way to 2019. So from 2014 when I joined to 2019, I was involved with data, and through that process, I just learned more about the design stages and the types of customers and construction itself. Then I took an adventure to try to build a building. So I bought a piece of land, and I took my uncle out of retirement, who was a civil engineer, and we started a construction process.
Hold on, wait a minute. So you're doing all this data work, tech work, programming work. You're like, I'm going to build a building. Where does that? Why don't you start small? Like, I'm going to build a cabinet or a desk. You're going to build a building. You're going to get your retired engineering uncle to help you. What is going on over here?
Yeah, So that's the story. Yeah, I think so my thinking, I had built cabinets before because of the mechanical background, and I was just wondering, like, what does it take to actually get a full building project off the ground? And I had been working with customers that just do that for a living, so I thought it can't be that hard to get a 4-story multifamily residential building built out and do that as an investment. So
And what city was this in? Where was this building?
This was built in Brazil, like where I came from.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, and then I have a couple more investments here. Now we're in the 3rd project there. So we've done already a few projects.
So you're trying to build a building. You're running into all kinds of problems, I assume. That's how all these startup stories happen. And I did this, and there was a problem, so I did my startup to solve it. But what made you think I'm going to solve this through my own company? And I have a lot of things I complain about in life, but I don't think I'm going to go start a company to fix it. That's a pretty big leap to go from problem to startup.
Yeah. I think that is just, maybe it goes back to cultural, but I think I grew up with the idea that we can do anything, we can build anything we need, or anything we might want. I think the question is always what to build. So I think when you have the bug of being an entrepreneur and starting companies, the question is always like, what do you build? Because it takes time, and you'll be dedicated to it for 10 plus years. So you have to be certain that what you're building is worth it and that people want it. And then the best way to find that out is by trying to do it, right? So
how has the journey been? Have there been times where you thought to yourself, I've really made a big mistake. I don't know if this has been the best use of my life, the best use of my time over the last few years. What's been the ups and downs over the last few years with this?
Yeah, I think so. I think in the construction project, and when I started, I thought, just starting going back there, when stuff happens, just we couldn't break ground because there was a power line through the property, and you have to take the power line, and the electrical company from the state has to come in and remove the power line. So things like that. Like I had been doing software for years, and for me, it was like everything is very accessible, it's very easy. You want to deploy a new tool, it's very easy to do that. But with the physical world, everything takes a lot longer, and there's a lot more problems. So that was the interesting aspect, and then just diving in spreadsheets was the cherry on the top.
So what's the pitch to businesses? Say, here's why you need Toric. I mean, obviously we know, okay, they shouldn't do everything on spreadsheets and Word docs and paper, but they're doing it, right? Like they're surviving, they're getting by. Hey, this is how we've been building buildings for years and centuries, right? They were building things before they had technology, before they had electricity. So we don't really need this. What is your pitch to them to say, here's why you should do this. Here's why you should spend this money, pay me for this stuff?
Yeah. So I think just, to the second part of the previous question is I'm having the time of my life, because for the first time, I think we're building a business before anybody else started building a business. So the opportunity is just awesome. And just seeing what companies are out there ready to do to advance their productivity and to make their lives better. It's just seeing that. I think 10 years ago, we couldn't have started this company. And I think the pitch is just like, do you think data will improve your outcomes as a company? It has done it for so many industries. Why wouldn't it happen in construction?
So give me an example. If I'm an architect or an engineer, construction company, what is the kind of data? Just you use a customer example, you don't have to give a name. What's the kind of data that your service shows them that they wouldn't have already known? And what can they do with that data?
Yeah. So we aggregate data from financial sources, projects, and actual building designs. So we can take data from all the different products that are out there, generating data in construction, and correlate all of it together. So a use case is, there's really 3 main things that people want to know. Is they want to know how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, where are the errors and the risk built into it, and also the ability to understand what they have done in the past. How did that perform, right? Like I engage in a project, it's going to be, $100 million project. Any error that I make might cost me millions, right? And then when that happens, I don't make money on the project. So that's how construction companies operate. They have a small margin of safety to operate and make money. And that margin is generally controlled by predicting what's going to happen. And data is the key to it all.
You mentioned you're the first. You don't have competition. So right now, are there new competitors in the space? Because whenever there's a good idea, someone else comes in. So are you competing against a specific company, or are you competing against them just doing nothing at all? Right? You know what I'm saying? Sort of like, is it going with Thiago or not, or is it going with Thiago or some other competitor?
Yeah, I think the general competition that we see is internal initiatives. I think companies are trying to do this, and many companies have built and invest time and money and put somebody in charge to try to figure out data for them. And I think that is sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But generally, internal initiatives to build like really complex data architecture, those are the ones we're generally either partnering up with or replacing entirely.
Who are some of your partners that you need APIs with, connections with, deals, vendor deals with, so that you have access to more of this data so that your end customer is getting the benefit of all of this? My guess is you've negotiated a lot of partnership deals.
Yeah, we partner with the main companies in the space. So Procore is a partner, Autodesk is a partner. We're partnering with Bentley. We're partnering with Nemetschek. You know, like we connect to their APIs. We're in the partner program. We're partnering with Oracle as well to access some of the finance data in the database that construction companies have been using for years. And Microsoft, you know, AWS cloud, essentially, you know, we're connecting to all of the data sources that our customers have data in.
I want to ask a sensitive question. How much does all of this cost? How do you price this out for your customers? If I decide, hey, I'm going to start being a real estate investor and I'm going to start constructing buildings, how much do I need to pay you for all this data?
That's a great question. The best answer to that is really depends. So you know, it can be something where you're just optimizing one step of the process, right? I just want to automate estimation, right? I just want to make sure that my estimations are correlated to the design data, or it can be, you know, I just want to automate embodied carbon reports. I just want to know how much carbon is embodied in the cement that I'm going to use, because, you know, I'm applying for tax credits for the building, and the building has to be at a certain level of embodied carbon for environmental efficiencies. So it can be that, or it can be like, you know, I have 10,000, 20,000 files that I produce every week. And I need to ingest those files and build an ingestion engine and be able to analyze all these together.
There was a real interesting example you gave. How much carbon is in you said the cement, the concrete? How is this? What's going on right now with these major projects is they're trying to figure out the carbon, you know, innate and all the steps
Footprint
along the way. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that it's getting into that kind of detail.
Yeah. It is a big part of it. I think the American Architects Association is actually attempting to bring everybody together in you know, with a target of by 2030 or so to have buildings being built more efficiently environmentally. And I think construction is a large part of the environmental problem, because transporting concrete is very expensive. It requires a lot of trucking, a lot of gas, because it's a very heavy material. So generally, the way you have to figure out how much carbon this building is going to emit is by how much cement you need to move. And the crazier of a design you make, the more cement you need, the more reinforced concrete you need, which is even more carbon inefficient. And over time, you just have to be able to know what that cost would be.
That's a good point. I never thought about that, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So what are some mistakes that users of the legacy systems are making? Where do you see, where you kind of roll your eyes and you say, oh, here we go, I've seen this before?
Yeah, I think you know, generally everybody can try to like open up Excel and do something. I think it's just not repeatable, and that's where we generally come in. I think for a company that's doing like, you know, mom and pop shop, is renewing homes and building small buildings, like I think that we can't really help. But I think if you're building like 100 projects a year, and you're not tracking all your data effectively and not using your data effectively, well, that's your opportunity right there. And I think the mistake you make is to not invest now, because in the end, whoever's going to be doing that better will probably be winning more deals and delivering better.
You talk about investment, doing more deals. You guys had your own investment, your own deal. Talk about the recent funding, how much you raised, who you raised it from, and what you're planning to do with that funding.
Yeah. We just announced our Series A, so in total we have raised 16.5 million in financing, venture financing. Those were all investors that either we had an interesting rapport with or a relationship. I think one of the key investors and board members is Carl Bass, the former CEO of Autodesk. I know Carl for a number of years, and we've been working together. He has been responsible for some of the biggest changes, I would say, in the industry in the past several years, including the advent of BIM. I think bringing that mainstream and making it part of Autodesk was a critical step, and the ability to think about a building as an information model. That's essentially one of the things that enabled the possibility for this business today. So a few insiders and also the co-founders of PlanGrid were investors. Then we have venture investors like Storm Ventures and Leaders Fund that participated on the round as venture investors, and it's been great. We have been having a good time with the investors.
What are some of the trends that you're seeing right now, macro trends, thinking about 2 years of the pandemic, that changes the nature, at least for commercial real estate, if not personal, right? Everyone wants that home office, right? Companies need to rethink how they're scaling these buildings. Do they need them? What do they look like? Where are they building them? Why are they building them? But these projects take years. So things that have happened in the last couple of years, my guess is there are a lot of companies in the middle of a project who are saying, oh my gosh, by the time we finish this thing will already be obsolete, but there's nothing we can do about it now. I'm sure you're seeing all kinds of interesting trends. I'd love to hear some of the stories about what your clients are dealing with right now.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things happening. I think I think the most recent one that I can remember, a major tech company built a major development in the Bay Area, and it's been empty for 2 years now. They finished right before the pandemic, and they never occupied the office. And they spent $400 million in the building. So I think, like, you just look at that, you're like, okay, so what is going to happen next, right? Like, are we going back to the office? I think we have to, because of productivity reasons. Some companies associate productivity to going back to the office. I don't personally think that is entirely true. But also the fact that there's so much investment in real estate and it needs to be utilized. So it's either going to be utilized in an ad hoc fashion, or it's going to be utilized in other ways that we have yet to discover.
What about on the individual real estate side, just your typical single family home? Does Toric get involved in that? Are a lot of your customers building single family homes, or is this much more a commercial real estate play?
It's commercial real estate, warehouses, data centers, high rises. We see a lot of those types of bridges, tunnels, right? Like, we have a lot of people in that side of linear infrastructure. I think that's where it's going really well, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of infrastructure being built. There's so many hospitals being built right now, specifically because of the pandemic. So
the infrastructure bill that keeps getting changed, and who knows what it is. How closely do you pay attention to something like that? Because all of a sudden, if you're getting billions, trillions of dollars getting put into infrastructure, that can only be helpful to you at the end level. Okay, more people are going to spend money on building things, whether you're hospitals, tunnels, bridges, all of this stuff. You want to see this get done. You want to see money in the system. How closely do you pay attention to the DC side of things, the Sacramento side of things, the governments?
Yeah, we pay close attention to it. And I think primarily what we want to do is to help reduce the amount of waste, right? I mean, just detecting problems before they happen, that's where data comes in to help. And I think, there's a lot of capital, but projects can be mismanaged, and we can end up just not achieving as much as we expect. So
what are some mistakes that even the good construction companies make, the good engineers, the good architects? Do you see companies that are using Toric already? So it's like, all right, they're signing up. They want to be leading edge. They want to be forward thinking. They want to be high tech using this data, but they're still messing up. What are the problems that they're running into right now?
Yeah. We are lucky to work with most forward thinking companies in the space. Most of our customers, they're doing really well financially, and they're executing a lot of projects. They weren't affected by the pandemic as much. And they have been engaged in a lot of ways with us. And I think in terms of the mistakes that companies make, I mean, in the end, construction it's about people. more than any other industry.
Everybody says every industry is about people, though, right? Everybody
But
says
construction,
people.
yeah, but construction is incredibly interconnected with jobs and people, because you just think about the pandemic. We can go home and work from home. Construction people can't.
Absolutely cannot work from home, right? You have to be there. So what was the last 2 years like then? If it was vaccine mandates and who's sick and social distancing, my guess is it really put a lot of extra cost and backed up the timelines for a lot of these projects.
Yeah, a few projects were backed up, and I'm surprised how little the industry was affected. Just shows how resilient the construction industry is, and also how the government, has managed it. Actually, kept everybody employed in some ways. And I think that's a quite interesting aspect to the construction industry, unique to the construction industry more than other industries, because the number of people that are employed in construction is very large. So, and I think that just seeing how house prices slightly dropped during the pandemic, and then they just came back up roaring, because a lot of people are like, now I can live like in a few miles away. I don't need to leave like downtown San Francisco anymore, which means house prices elsewhere are going up, right? So it's a wave, and people need homes. There's just unless we reduce the number of people in the planet, but as long as it's increasing, we need to continue building.
What role does Toric play in that housing market? I know you say most of your clients, they're doing bigger commercial things, really big infrastructure things, not so much the single family homes, but it's all connected, right? A high rise affects the supply of housing, where offices affect where people want to live, bridges and tunnels affects where people want to live, hospitals. So where do you see your role in the housing market? Like you said, 2 years ago, pandemic started, no one has money to buy a house now. And then within a couple months, oh my gosh, have to buy a house now. It really changed rapidly. What's the Toric role in that whole ecosystem?
Yeah, it's as you described. I mean, if you're going to have a new set of home developments, you need you need a road to get there. You need a hospital. You need a Walmart next to it. You need you need buildings that support from an infrastructure level. You need new wastewater treatment plants, right? I think it's just all connected because of the way that construction works, and because it's kind of the foundational industry, if you may. I mean, after farming, I think if you take farming and construction, they're the two that keep civilization going. So
right, where they say it's like food, clothing, and shelter. So farming is the food, and this is the shelter.
Right.
What's the experience like for you running a company? But it's not like you worked in construction. It's not like you are an architect or an engineer. You just wanted to do a house, a 4-story house, and then you got into this. How much do you have to rely on others because you're not a career expert in some of these things and you have to make decisions about it? What is that dynamic like trying to run a company whose end clients aren't something that you have decades of experience being one of them?
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually a 12 unit. This was 12 units in a 4-story multifamily residential. So it's actually quite complicated to just understand how, there's basic things. If you're building 2 stories and the stories are not aligned, I mean, it's going to cost more just to pass the pipes, because you cannot have pipes going all the way up in the wall. So there's just so much detail. It's just incredible. And you kind of learn at every level of it, because a building is really a series of overlapping structures, right? You have you just think about buildings as being walls and roof and floors, but actually there's so many things that go in the process of making the building, and the sequence of execution is really important. So I just like learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I have been learning in a lot of different fields. I got myself into physics and mechanical engineering because I enjoyed it, and I don't necessarily have a background, but also, I think I dropped out of school at 17 to build my first company. So I always thought everything was possible. And I just kept on learning and building companies and learning about space.
What are the lessons you've learned from previous companies, right? We always typically hear startup founders, they've had a few failures, they have a few successes, they go through some companies, and some of them can be done pretty fast. My guess is if you've done a few companies, they all had different levels of success. Yeah. So what did you learn from maybe some of the lesser successful ones?
Yeah. So my past 2 companies were successful. So the one prior to that, I think, back a long time ago, I tried to build like in 1998 I took an AutoCAD drawing of the city that I was used to live in, and I put it in a web browser, and I tried to sell ads on the map as a way to navigate the city digitally as an online guide for the city. So that was my failure. That was in the 90s. I mean, computers weren't very good at anything. So just figuring out how to tie an AutoCAD drawing into, a JPEG, and then just put that inside of a web browser so you can click through a web browser and find, places that we had ads placed on. So I think that was my first experience trying to build a company, way ahead of my time, way ahead of anything, if you may. And I think what you generally learn as you build companies is you learn to, at Autodesk, I had a pretty large team as well. So I kind of learned to deal with like all different sizes of teams. But for me, is about figuring out like what's unique about what you're trying to do and how are you adding value to your end customer. And that kind of like you take everything from that, right? Like how do we power, this new generation of companies that are attempting to become data driven in construction, right? Like we are the vehicle for them to get there. And as far as building companies, I think it gets easier over time as you kind of do it once or twice. And I think it's all about understanding just the various things that go on to build companies. A lot of companies fail not because they have bad ideas, they have the wrong go-to-market, but sometimes they fail just because they were stuck in an idea and they couldn't change it, or because they got too down a path and then they couldn't realize what was there. So for us, when we started, we say, we're not going to get down any path. We're just going to talk to people for as long as we can and build a software based on what we learned from the conversations we have. So that simplified getting to the right product, which is the critical part of startups.
What is your current ranking of challenges right now? Because a lot of companies, it's can't find enough employees, or it's can't get enough customers, or it's I can't get enough investors, or I can't get the word out in the media. Like, where do you rank your current struggles at the moment?
Our biggest struggles right now is becoming hiring, because we got to a point where we're starting to see companies, we're starting to feel much more of a pull for our solution. Mostly because we're seeing a lot of success with the initial customers, and also because it's just time that people are starting to realize, okay, this is a thing, and we need to start thinking about it and leveraging it. And companies are gaining an advantage by doing that. So every time that somebody has an advantage by using a different solution, then everybody else follows. So for us now, we have quite a lot of pull from our customers, our existing customers and new customers. And hiring is becoming the biggest issue. Hiring today is the most difficult thing in general.
How do you compete against the big tech firms or those big equity packages that some of the hot startups are offering? How do you compete with that? Is it just on cash? Is it equity? Is it, hey, we're a nice place to work? I mean, it's a cutthroat environment out there to hire good engineers.
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of it. I think you have, as a startup backing, my last startup, I started in 2012. And I think back then you could pay much lower salaries. You could afford to get people just excited about this thing, leave them equity. Today that's nearly impossible. You have to be competitive on all dimensions with the larger companies, because the talent out there is quite unique, and everybody's bidding on that same talent. So, and the pool is very limited. So you have to be very competitive in terms of packages and offers. That's one thing that changed absolutely in the past 5 years. There's no question that's a new world.
A lot of inflation out there, right? Across a lot of different dimensions. You must see it in your actual work, right? The customer's work, supply chain inflation. Can you get raw goods and materials? Can you actually get the stuff to make these buildings? Are you seeing truly on the ground problems right now with the supply chain just holding up timelines and bottlenecks because they can't get the stuff there?
Yeah, we hear sometimes. I think some of the customers, the biggest ask we get there is, how do we get real-time information about commodity prices, right? Like there's a few sources out there of data that you can rely on. But, during the pandemic, a lot of people got into really bad outcomes on their construction projects because they bid it in the beginning, like in the cost of goods in the beginning, and at the end of the project were very different. So that created a crunch on materials as soon as the pandemic hit, because everybody wanted to buy all the materials they needed for the lifetime of the project before the price skyrocket. But then when everybody wants to buy at the same time, the prices go up as well. So, I mean, you couldn't find anything. Literally, you couldn't find, back in like the top of the pandemic, you couldn't find most basic things like mirrors was hard to find in certain countries and states. Like aluminum was hard to find. Finding, goods that were coming from China was hard. Things that were manufactured or industrialized.
Yeah, can't be fun. Can't be fun when you're staring at those commodity prices and you're trying to just get these buildings done. So where do you think a year from now we're going to be? We've got supply chain issues. We've got crisis in Europe that might affect energy prices. And we know energy affects just how much it costs for aluminum and all these things. Where do you see the challenges and the opportunities over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I mean, it would be, I would just do that for a living, I guess. But I think it would be, it's hard to imagine what might happen. I think for certain what is happening is all these companies exiting in Russia just means that that's going to take 20 years plus for the region to heal, right? Maybe 10 years, if there's some very fast advance politically right there. But I think it just means that the region is going to be affected for 20 plus years, which might feel more conflict.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have a crystal ball. It's better not to know at this moment. And then finally, we'll end a little lighter. My wife watches a lot of HGTV, right? And they're always flipping homes and designing this and buildings, and everyone thinks they're going to be an investor, right? There's this whole world out there of people who want to get involved in real estate investment. When you see these kinds of shows, maybe you're too smart to watch them. When you see these things, what do you roll your eyes about? Because like, this is not real. This is fake. Like, the people must talk to you about these types of things. Hey, I'm going to start investing in real estate. What are your thoughts on all of that, on that whole world out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting world. I actually sometimes I end up having that playing on TV, and I also watch. Right, I think it's interesting to see what people go for. But yeah, I think it's a part of. I think it's a building a home takes time. So flipping a home is not a bad business model if you can do it. But it requires a lot of experience to actually be involved with buildings, because the total cost of the projects are very large. So if you make a mistake, it can cost a ton. And I think that's where the fine line is. So the TV shows, they show people that are a little bit, I guess, prepared. I would like to see a TV show where like a bunch of people that never built anything before try to flip a home.
That's the idea, right? That would be a good one, like Flipping Rookies or something like that.
Yeah.
Like people that have no idea, and then we see how long it takes them, and it's like, oh, well, at the end of the 3 years that they thought would take 3 months, they lost $250,000, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what would be the story there for sure, because there's so much detail and so much experience. And it's the reason why the industry is some of the companies we work with, they were founded in 1920s.
Right.
And they are family owned. And why are they family owned? Because who else are you going to trust when you're like building massive, projects that might cost billions of dollars if you make a mistake? So
I'm glad someone does it. I don't think I've got the personality for it. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, Thiago. I appreciate the time today. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.